Altshausen detention center in Germany, the silence was broken by decisive footsteps. A group of Polish guards, former prisoners of war and survivors of the horrors perpetrated by the Nazi regime, entered the cell of Oskar Dirlewanger. This man, known for leading one of the most brutal SS units responsible for countless atrocities, now lay at the mercy of those who had once been his victims. Without a word, the guards began a relentless beating. The blows echoed through the halls, each one laden with the anger and pain accumulated over years of suffering. Dirlewanger, weakened and unable to defend himself, was beaten until his face and body were unrecognizable. This is the story of his death. The Devil's Face, Oskar Dirlewanger. In the heart of central Germany, at the end of the 19th century, Oskar Paul Dirlewanger was born, a man whose future brutality could not have been suspected from his family origins. Born on September 26, 1895, in the city of Würzburg, Dirlewanger was the son of August Dirlewanger, a lawyer by profession, and Pauline Herrlinger grew up with 3 other siblings in a seemingly typical environment for the time. He attended primary and secondary school and passed the demanding university entrance exam known as the Abitur. There is no record in his SS personnel file of him having any disciplinary problems in his youth, which contrasts sharply with the violence that would mark his later life. His military career began early in 1913 when he joined the Imperial Army and was assigned to the machine gun company of the 123rd Infantry Regiment. His baptism of fire came with the outbreak of the First World War. He was sent to the front in Belgium in 1914, and just as the conflict began on August 22nd, he received 2 wounds, a gunshot wound to the foot and a saber wound to the chest. The following day, he was wounded again, this time by shrapnel to the head. Despite the severity of his injuries, his performance earned him the Iron Cross, 2nd class, on August 28, 1914. He spent almost 4 months in various military hospitals before re-enlisting. On April 14, 1915, he was promoted to lieutenant and took command of a platoon. During this time, he was wounded again. On September 7th, he was shot in the hand and bayoneted in the right leg. On October 4, 1915, he was awarded the Württemberg Bravery Medal in gold, one of the highest regional awards. Due to his multiple wounds, he spent 5 months in military hospitals in Trier and Esslingen. In July 1916, he was awarded the Iron Cross, 1st class. In December of that year, he was assigned to the staff of the 7th Infantry Division, and in 1917 he returned to the front as commander of that division's assault company. He then assumed command of the 2nd Machine Gun Company of the 123rd Regiment, a unit he led until October 1918. On April 30, 1918, he was wounded in the left shoulder while fighting in southern Russia during the German occupation of Ukraine. At the end of the war, he was temporarily in command of the 2nd Battalion of the 121st Infantry Regiment, with which he undertook a long retreat from Russia through Romania, Hungary and Austria back to Germany. Once the conflict was over, Dirlewanger did not abandon his life of arms. He quickly joined the Freikorps, paramilitary groups made up of former soldiers, unemployed officers, radical nationalists, and aimless young men whose main motivation was to combat the rise of socialism and communism in the turbulent Weimar Republic. Far from being regular forces, the Freikorps operated as semi-legal armed gangs, and many of their units were named after their leaders. For Dirlewanger, who was 23 at the time and already a heavy drinker and chain smoker, violence remained his only lifeline. During 1919 and the early 1920s, he participated in numerous actions against strikes and communist uprisings. He fought in Backnang, Esslingen, Aalen, Schorndorf, Heidenheim, the Ruhr, Dortmund and Essen, and in eastern Germany. During this period, he was arrested several times and sentenced to prison twice for various crimes, although the sentences did not deter his actions. He joined the Freikorps, Epp, Haas, Sprösser and Holtz, and was wounded again, this time in the head, on April 12, 1921. That same year, he commanded an armored train that participated in the reconquest of the city of Sangerhausen, taken by communists led by Max Holtz. In parallel to his armed activism, Dirlewanger attempted to continue his academic training. In 1919, he attended a technical school in Mannheim and passed his graduation exam in March 1921, after which he enrolled at the University of Frankfurt. According to his personnel file, he earned a doctorate in economics. His involvement with the National Socialist movement also began early. He first joined the NSDAP in October 1922 with the number 12,517. During the failed Munich putsch in November 1923, he attempted to transport armored vehicles from Stuttgart to Bavaria, but later left the party. His association with Nazism was intermittent over the following years. He rejoined the party in 1926, number 13,566. But in 1928 he began working at a Jewish-owned textile factory in Erfurt, which distanced him from the party once again. By 1931 he was working as a tax accountant, and on March 1, 1932, he rejoined the NSDAP, this time with the number 198,716. He also joined the SA, the party's paramilitary groups, where he held minor positions. That same year, he began working at the Heilbronn Employment Office, a position possibly reserved for war veterans like himself. The reputation he had forged in the Freikorps not only persisted, but was even recognized officially. In 1934, he was named an honorary citizen of Sangerhausen for his role in suppressing the Communist Uprising of 1921. The local newspaper Heilbronner Stadtchronik celebrated the award in an epic tone. It portrayed him as the city's savior from the Red Bandits, praising his wound in combat, his use of hand grenades and machine guns, and the bravery of his troops, of whom 22 were wounded and 1 killed. The article noted that had he not succeeded, all would have died, and attributed the restoration of order in Sangerhausen to his courage. Dirlewanger's armoured train, the report said, had been the first military formation to fly a swastika flag in 1921. And, as a final flourish, it mentioned that barely back from that campaign, Dirlewanger was imprisoned in Mosbach for violating the disarmament law. But even that imprisonment wouldn't have discouraged him. No sooner was he released than he went off to fight again with the Freikorps in Upper Silesia. In the official Nazi narrative, Dirlewanger was the embodiment of the war veteran willing to risk everything for his fatherland, the kind of man they needed to realize the Führer's vision. His career as a paramilitary fighter, marked by unwavering fanaticism and a pathological inclination toward violence, was not an exception at the time, but a consistent product of an era in which brutality was confused with patriotism. Until 1933, Dirlewanger served as a simple SA rank and file, a private in the Brown militia who marched to the beat of Adolf Hitler's drum. But his story was far from over. The most sinister had yet to begin. By the mid-1930s, Oskar Dirlewanger seemed to have achieved a certain stability. He had risen to the position of Deputy Director of the Labour Office in Heilbronn, a respectable state position in times of deep economic crisis. He was a member of the National Socialist Party, had an impressive military service record and an almost legendary aura for his campaigns in the Freikorps. His place in the National Socialist apparatus seemed assured. A seasoned fighter, a loyal servant of the regime, and a useful symbolic figure for local propaganda. However, beneath this facade of respectability lurked an unstable, violent, and self-destructive personality. And everything was about to collapse. In July 1934, events took an irreversible turn. During a demonstration by the SA, the Nazi Party's paramilitary organization in the town of Esslingen, Dirlewanger staged a violent assault on the local Labour office, culminating in a confrontation with the police in which he was injured. The incident not only caught the attention of judicial authorities who charged him with civil disturbance, but also raised alarm bells within the SA itself. His conduct had not only caused trouble with the law, but had also brought him into open conflict with the regional command structure. Soon his confrontation with the Kreisleiter, district leader of the party, erupted publicly. One of the most revealing testimonies about this conflict came years later from SS leader Gottlob Berger during the Nuremberg trials. Berger admitted that Dirlewanger wasn't exactly a good guy, but partially excused him because of his record as a soldier. He acknowledged that one of his biggest problems was that he didn't know when to stop drinking. During one such binge in the summer of 1934, Dirlewanger crossed all the limits tolerable even by the tolerant Nazi apparatus. On the night of July 14th to 15th, 1934, just weeks after the Purge of Rome, the national leader of the SA executed on Hitler's orders on July 1st in what would become known as the Night of the Long Knives, Dirlewanger was arrested by police for a series of offences committed during a night of drunken debauchery. The charges were serious: sexual relations with a minor, drunk driving, and leaving the scene of a car accident. The case file suggests that he may have been acting in a state of confusion or desperation following the execution of Röhm, a key figure in the SA and with whom Dirlewanger possibly identified. But regardless of his motives, the facts were too damning. The party machinery was quickly activated. Even before the judicial proceedings were concluded, the regional SA structure initiated proceedings for his expulsion. On August 8, 1934, the SA Southwest Group, based in Stuttgart, sent a formal request to the Supreme Headquarters in Munich for Dirlewanger's immediate and permanent expulsion. The document, contained in his SS personnel file, was unstinting in details and devastating judgments about his conduct. The report began by acknowledging his entry into the SA in April 1932 and his position at the Labour Office. However, it noted that in late July he had been arrested for offences under Article 176 of the Penal Code, referring to sexual abuse of minors, and that for this reason he had been immediately removed from his position as deputy director. The report added 2 further charges: driving the office's official car while intoxicated, causing an accident in which a female passenger was seriously injured, and leaving the scene without rendering assistance, all this in a single night. Furthermore, a recent history of political indiscipline within the SA was detailed. Dirlewanger had been removed from the 155th Brigade after being accused of internal agitation against the unit's commander and staff. He was linked to a group of disaffected members who confused National Socialism with National Bolshevism and refused to obey orders. He was particularly associated with the troop leader Steimel, already sentenced to prison, with whom he maintained a fractious clique in Heilbronn. But the report's most direct attack was directed at Dirlewanger's boundless ambition and lack of merit. Despite his short service in the SA, he requested, through a party contact, a promotion to the rank of Standartenführer, equivalent to colonel, a claim the report described as absurd given his weak and disorganized service from the outset. Although he had recently been made an honorary citizen of Sangerhausen, the southwestern SA believed such recognition could not overshadow the seriousness of his recent actions. The most devastating paragraph in the document was also the most explicit. According to the complaint, Dirlewanger had repeatedly engaged in sexual relations inside the official Labour Office vehicle with girls under the age of 14. This behaviour, the report added, made him utterly unbearable for the reputation and discipline of the SA in Heilbronn. His example was so negative that it threatened to undermine the morale and image of the entire organisation. The verdict was clear: he must be expelled immediately. The letter concluded with a sense of urgency. In the name of the general interest of the National Socialist movement, it requested that the expulsion decision be taken as soon as possible. It stated that a criminal trial for moral offences was imminent and that Dirlewanger would almost certainly be sentenced to several years in prison. This was no longer an isolated incident, but a pattern of behaviour, that of a man whose military record and reputation as a war veteran could no longer protect him from the justice of the regime he himself had served. In a move that reflects both the opportunism and cynicism of the Nazi regime, Dirlewanger was cast out of the SA as a pariah. Despite having embodied the ideal of the National Socialist fighter for years, he was now considered a threat, not for his crimes themselves, but for the damage his conduct caused to the organization's image. His fall from grace was an act of internal purge that, at another time, would have ended in execution, but in his case, another kind of redemption would come. Although he was now a common convict, disowned by his own party, his fate would not be oblivion. In the coming hell of war, his brutality would still find a place. In July 1934, Oskar Dirlewanger seemed to have found a place in the Third Reich. He had a stable job as deputy director of the Labour Office in Heilbronn, an unusual privilege in the days of mass unemployment. He was a member of the Nazi Party, the SA Paramilitary Corps, a veteran of the Great War, and the Freikorps. He had been decorated and revered in certain circles for his brutality. He was, on the surface, a functioning Nazi functionary. But all that was to end with one night of drunkenness, violence, and crime. On July 14, 1934, while the echoes of Hitler's recent purge of the SA leadership, including the assassination of Ernst Röhm, were still resonating, Dirlewanger was arrested after an episode that epitomized his misery. Drunk at the wheel of an official car, he caused an accident that injured a woman and fled the scene. He was arrested shortly after, still intoxicated. But the worst came when it was learned that that same night he had sexually abused a 14-year-old girl, a member of the BDM, the party's women's youth organization. This wasn't the first time. He had turned the state car into a space for crime. The police found evidence that he had repeatedly had sex with underage girls inside the state car. The scandal broke. The party, in the midst of an internal purge, needed to get rid of the most compromising elements. The machinery was activated. On August 8th, the SA Southwest Group sent a report requesting Dirlewanger's immediate expulsion. They accused him of violating Articles 7E, 7F, and 7G of the organization's regulations. The letter listed a series of serious offenses: child abuse, drunk driving, causing bodily harm, fleeing the scene of an accident, and also agitating against the local command, clandestine meetings with radicalized elements, insulting superiors, and promoting ideas close to National Bolshevism. He was not only a criminal, but also a source of disorder within a structure that sought to impose absolute order. He was described as the leader of an undisciplined circle that confused National Socialism with Bolshevism and refused to act with discipline. For the new Oberfuhrer Ziegler, sent to pacify Heilbronn, Dirlewanger was an obstacle that had to be eliminated as quickly as possible. On August 30th, 1934, he was expelled from the SA. The Nazi Party expelled him permanently in February 1936, following an internal disciplinary trial. The statement was blunt. Anyone who commits such abuse against our young women no longer has a place in the NSDAP. His privileges, insignia, and uniform were withdrawn. The doctorate he had earned years earlier was revoked. He was sentenced by a civilian court to a prison term of 2 or 2.5 years, according to conflicting records. He was imprisoned in the Ludwigsburg State Penitentiary on January 11, 1935. He was released on October 12, 1936. His record included the crime of criminal indecency with a minor. He attempted to appeal, seeking to overturn the ruling, but his actions only worsened his situation. In 1937, he was interned again, this time under protective custody at the Welzheim concentration camp. Gauleiter Wilhelm Mohr, who despised him, was blunt. He had him locked up as a preventive measure, a form of punishment without trial. He was a pariah even within the state's own repressive apparatus, but not everyone abandoned him. One of his former comrades, Gottlob Berger, stepped in to protect him. Berger was a veteran of the Great War like Dirlewanger and had now risen within the SS. From his post, he wrote in his defense. He acknowledged that Dirlewanger was not a good boy, but he emphasized his courage, his past as a soldier, his loyalty. He excused him. He had one great flaw: he didn't know when to stop drinking. Thanks to his efforts, Dirlewanger was released from Welzheim and sent to fight in Spain. In April 1937, he joined the Condor Legion as an instructor, a German unit sent by Hitler to support Franco in the Civil War. In November, he was briefly arrested in Toledo for political unreliability, but was released thanks to the intervention of Colonel von Thoma and the SS Standartenführer, Victor Brack. He fought for over a year, was wounded, and was decorated. He received the Spanish Cross, the Spanish Campaign Medal, and the Spanish Military Service Cross. Hitler personally approved one of these decorations. Meanwhile, in Germany, the Sicherheitsdienst, Soldier's Office, prepared a report on his political situation. They acknowledged his criminal record but considered him to be absolutely politically reliable, to have no religious affiliation, and to be fiercely anti-communist. His sexual behavior was downplayed as a personal weakness. In June 1939, he returned to Germany. On July 4th, he wrote directly to Himmler. He begged to be accepted into the Waffen-SS. He offered himself as a commander, as a soldier, as an absolute servant of the Reich. His letter was an act of desperation and calculation. He knew that in times of war, past crimes could be transformed into credentials. Himmler accepted, and with that, it all began. The sinister unit is born during the first months of 1940, as the Third Reich prepared for its offensive in the West. An unusual initiative began to take shape in the highest echelons of Nazi power: the creation of a special unit made up of convicted poachers. The order, according to various sources, came directly from Adolf Hitler. On March 23rd of that year, Himmler's deputy, SS Gruppenführer Karl Wolff, telephoned an advisor at the Ministry of Justice to convey a singular directive. The Führer wished to grant a selective amnesty to certain convicted poachers with the aim of sending them to the front lines. The following day, this decision was formalized in a letter signed by Heinrich Himmler himself. The seemingly absurd idea stemmed both from the regime's fascination with the symbols of the tough, wild man and from Hitler's personal contempt for traditional hunters. For the Führer, poachers represented a purer type of humanity, free from the bourgeois hypocrisy of hunting clubs. The initiative met with an immediate response. The Ministry of Justice began collecting the names of all individuals convicted of violations of Article 292 of the Penal Code or Statute 60 of the Reich hunting law. The accused were grouped into three categories: prisoners currently serving their sentences, convicted persons who had not yet entered prison, and those with suspended sentences. The collection was exhaustive. 220 were identified in the first category, 276 in the second, and 735 in the third. On March 30th, 1940, Himmler's official letter arrived at the ministry. It specified that only poachers who had used firearms would be considered, those who had used traps or snares were excluded, and that the selection should focus on men of Bavarian or Austrian origin, considered by Hitler to be the most suitable. These men would be organized into a special sniper unit under SS control. On April 4th, officials from the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, Reich Main Security Office, and the Ministry of Justice met to define admission criteria. Among the questions raised were whether there would be an age limit, whether people convicted of other crimes would be accepted, whether the SS would have access to the complete files or only a list, and who would have the final say on admissions. The answer was blunt. The SS would have the final say. There would be no age limit. Suspended sentences would not be accepted, and violent repeat offenders would be sought out, especially those who had attacked foresters. This was, in effect, a recruitment of hardened criminals. On April 10th, these guidelines were sent to the Reich judicial authorities, and over the following months, the SS selected 84 suitable poachers. In June, these men were transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, located north of Berlin, where they began their military training under the name Wilddiebkommando, Oranienburg, the Oranienburg Poaching Command. Sachsenhausen was not a traditional military training center, but one of the three pillars of the Reich's concentration camp system. Founded in 1936 under the notorious Karl Koch, Sachsenhausen was characterized by its systematic cruelty, its semi-public structure, and its integration with the industrial Oranienburg. More than 100,000 people were murdered there. Its prisoners included prominent figures such as former Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg and Stalin's son. It was in this brutal and dehumanizing environment that the unit that would later be known as the Dirlewanger Brigade was born. In the context of these maneuvers, Oskar Dirlewanger, recently rehabilitated by the Reich judicial apparatus, was about to receive his chance at rebirth. On May 20th, 1940, the Württemberg-Hohenzollern Regional Court overturned his conviction for child sexual abuse, dating back to 1934. The rehabilitation process had begun years earlier, with repeated requests to reopen the case alleging that the minor had lied to him about her age. After serving his sentence between 1935 and 1936, Dirlewanger had volunteered for the Spanish Civil War, where he served in the Condor Legion and received the Spanish Cross in silver for his service. This military record, coupled with his political connections with figures such as Gottlob Berger, was key to overturning the sentence. The court overturned not only his criminal conviction but also his expulsion from the Nazi Party, the loss of his public office, and the revocation of his reserve officer rank and university degree. By May 1940, Dirlewanger was no longer a convicted criminal. In the eyes of the state, he was a rehabilitated veteran and an exonerated patriot. The synchronization between the formation of the Poaching Commando and Dirlewanger's official rehabilitation was no coincidence. In the eyes of Himmler and Berger, Dirlewanger's profile made him the ideal candidate to lead this unit. A veteran, brutal, fanatical, familiar with violence, and already marginalized from the civilian world, he perfectly represented the type of commander the SS was seeking for this extreme experiment. Thus, in 1940, while the German divisions were preparing to crush France, a different formation began to take shape in the shadows. Not just any military unit, but an organized criminal group, trained and legitimized by the state, and commanded by a man who should never have worn a uniform again. The birth of cruelty, the early years of the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, 1940 to 1941. Dirlewanger was placed in charge of a special unit of poachers in June 1940. No one imagined that this small experiment in repression would become one of the most brutal squads of the Third Reich. With the personal support of Gottlob Berger and the blessing of Heinrich Himmler, the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger was officially born in July 1940 as part of the plan to combat partisans and subversive elements in the rear of the SS and the Heer. The first men recruited for the unit came directly from German prisons. 84 repeat poachers who, according to Nazi racial doctrine, retained a natural fighting instinct and a proximity to the Volksboden. For Himmler, these men, convicted of challenging the state but trained in the forest, were ideal for tracking operations in hostile territory. Thus, an informal corps was formed without distinctive emblems or regular rules, but with a clear function: to ruthlessly destroy any pockets of civil or political resistance. During its first weeks, the Sonderkommando was trained in the town of Oranienburg and then transferred to Poland. In November 1940, it was stationed in the Governor-Generalate region in the Lublin area. Its first destination was the Belzec forced labor camp, still without gas chambers at that time, where it collaborated in the surveillance, punishment, and elimination of Jewish and Polish prisoners suspected of participating in clandestine networks. There, the unit's operational style began to take shape: night actions, immediate executions, looting of property, and a complete absence of judicial oversight. In early 1941, the Sonderkommando was assigned to internal repression duties in the Zamość district. Internal security police documents show that its presence was linked to the crushing of several Polish resistance cells, especially in rural areas. The method was simple and terrifying. A village was surrounded, the men brutally interrogated, the suspects summarily executed, and then the houses set on fire. The surviving women and children were sent to camps or deported to Germany for forced labor. During these months, the number of troops grew to about 200 men, still recruited from prisons. They were no longer just poachers. Common criminals, men with convictions for assault, robbery, and even rape were added. The SS High Command accepted this evolution as inevitable. To carry out the task of cleansing, disciplined soldiers were not required, but rather proactive executioners. In April 1941, in the context of the German invasion of Yugoslavia, Dirlewanger was transferred with his unit to the Slovak border area and then to southern Poland. There they participated in preparing operations against suspected Slavic saboteurs and in preemptive raids on villages serving as refuge for deserters or resistance fighters. In reports sent to Berlin, Himmler highlighted the Sonderkommando's effectiveness in identifying and eliminating elements hostile to the Reich, while simultaneously initiating preparations for his most ambitious deployment, Operation Barbarossa. With the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger was transferred to command the HSSPF, Höhere SS und Polizeiführer, of Army Group Center. Its role was to act in the immediate rear of the German military advance, suppressing any outbreak of resistance in the newly occupied territories of Belarus and Western Russia. In its first major operation in July 1941, the unit saw action on the outskirts of Baranovichi, where small groups of Soviet partisans were already operating. There, under the pretext of preemptive action, the Sonderkommando razed several villages. All the men were executed for alleged collaboration with the enemy, and the women were subjected to brutal interrogations. Reports of this mission make no distinction between civilians and combatants. According to German records, the area was pacified and cleared of hostile elements. That same month, the squadron received its first shipment of Soviet prisoners for real-life training. They were used as live targets in tracking and extermination drills. One common method was to release the prisoners into the woods with their hands tied, giving the troops orders to hunt them down for fun. Some insider accounts speak of veritable orgies of violence, with rapes, mutilations, and shootings filmed as souvenirs. In August and September, Dirlewanger and his men took part in a series of anti-partisan actions around Minsk and Slutsk. Not only were individual fighters hunted down, but entire Jewish communities were exterminated under the pretext of providing logistical support to the Red Guerrillas. One of the most brutal episodes took place in the town of Krupki, where more than 800 people, including children and the elderly, were murdered in a single day. The massacre was so savage that even Wehrmacht officers formally protested the lack of method and unnecessary barbarity of the Sonderkommando, Borisov region. There, they built their first permanent headquarters and began to operate almost as an autonomous force. The number of members now exceeded 300 men, and a separate chain of command had been established, with no major ties to the regular police or the army. Orders came directly from the Reichssicherheitshauptamt or from Himmler himself. Toward the end of that year, with the front line stabilized by winter, the Sonderkommando continued its activities, night raids, summary executions, and the repression of rural communities. Brutality was the norm, and operational reports already spoke of the systematic cleansing of entire areas. The Lapel region, where more than 2,000 partisans were estimated to be operating, was turned into a hell for civilians. Thousands were executed on mere suspicion, villages burned to the ground, and the survivors deported or condemned to forced labor in inhumane conditions. Thus ended the first years of the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, not as a conventional unit, but as a semi-formal extermination tool with a military structure and a criminal vocation. Its men sought neither glory nor victory, but unbridled violence, and it was just the beginning. The darkest years were yet to come: Belarus, Warsaw, Slovakia, but the seed had already been planted. In 1940 and 1941, cruelty had found its form, and its name was Dirlewanger. During the autumn of 1942, the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger grew from a small battalion of reformed poachers into a force feared by every guerrilla on the Eastern Front. From January of that year, White Russia, Central Belarus, became a vast theater of anti-partisan fighting where the German General Staff and the SS Police coordinated 43 major operations, at least 29 of which involved the direct participation of Dirlewanger's unit. From March 1942, the Sonderkommando, under the command of SS Obersturmbannführer Oskar Dirlewanger, demonstrated its operational aggressiveness. In its first significant mission, between March 2nd and 10th, it surrounded and annihilated insurgent factions northeast of Osipovici and a few days later repulsed a partisan attack on Klitschew, saving an army column surrounded by its pursuers. These initial skirmishes highlighted two fundamental traits: the Sonderkommando's maneuverability in swampy and wooded areas and its total impunity vis-à-vis prisoners, who, whenever captured, were executed without hesitation. In April 1942, assigned to the Polizei Regiment Mitte, they were ordered to clear the strip between the Drut and Beresina rivers. With only 250 men, the unit struck heavy blows. It freed a cornered battalion at Ilisoa, razed fortified villages such as Selieri and Lushiza, and drove the guerrillas back through impassable swamps to Bacevici, destroying several enemy camps between the 8th and 15th of April. The following month, for his decisive and personal part in these actions, Dirlewanger was awarded the bar to the Iron Cross, second class. The morale of the troops depended largely on the brutality displayed. Suspicious villagers were forced to cross minefields, and those who returned with weapons were shot on sight. Villages were often flown over in light aircraft. A single shot from the ground was enough to seal the fate of the entire village in flames, with no judgment or distinction between combatants and civilians. In June, the Sonderkommando repelled ambushes in Orsa and Bastojoli. After learning of its responsibility for the murder of 17 police officers, Dirlewanger launched punitive expeditions that culminated in the burning of entire settlements and the execution of suspects in Stary, Bicho, Lubyanka, and surrounding areas. By then, the unit had already earned several distinctions: the Iron Cross First Class with bar, the Medal of the People of the East First and Second Class, and its own emblem, a stylized grenade with crossed rifles, approved by Himmler for its uniform. In September 1942, they participated in Operation Regatta 4–7 October under the command of SS Sturmbannführer from Treuenfeld, along with police battalions, Lithuanian units, and the French Legion. The plan called for occupying a 10-kilometer corridor between Mogilov and Shatiwa. After several engagements, the Sonderkommando returned with 7 of its own dead, 10 wounded, and multiple villages destroyed with no prisoners held. By the end of the year, Reich directives had further tightened the fighting. On 18 August, Hitler issued Order Number 46, which stripped the civilian population of all protection and forbade the prosecution of German soldiers for excesses in anti-gang operations, considering the use of indiscriminate violence as necessary to secure the rear and supply of troops. With the change of year in January 1943, the Sonderkommando integrated Operation Hornung, February 11th to 17th, in the Pripyat Basin, within the theatre of operations of Lieutenant General von Gottberg. Organized in concentrated battles, the Einheit killed and executed thousands of civilians, including women and the elderly, accused of collaborating with the partisans. Battle certificates list 1,381 enemy casualties in this initial action alone. Between 1943 and 1944, the unit was reclassified as SS Regiment, then SS Sturmbrigade, and finally as the 36th SS Grenadier Division, February 1945. Its deployment gained visibility during the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising in August 1944. It landed in the city on the 5th of August with a battalion of 365 men, which was soon joined by reinforcements up to 865 personnel, plus 1,900 reservists from the Matskow disciplinary camp. For 3 weeks, its contingents chased civilians through the ruins, searched buildings house by house, and fired indiscriminately to clear barricades. In the Old Town district, the level of destruction and extermination reached extreme levels. More than 4,000 tons of artillery and aerial bombardment pulverized entire blocks, while the few survivors trapped in the sewers were rendered useless by gases or suffocated in torrents of pressurized water. Dirlewanger himself, after being reprimanded by Himmler for delaying his arrival in Warsaw, took a few days of rest in Esslingen, even though neither victory nor Polish surrender was in sight. Thus, from the early stages of 1942 until the crushing of Warsaw in the autumn of 1944, the Sonderkommando Dirlewanger became known for its systematic violence in the East, applying a doctrine according to which it was better to shoot 2 more suspects than to let them live to avoid greater risks. During this period, the unit embodied anti-partisan warfare as an excuse for an extermination that combined military action with the genocide of civilian populations, leaving behind a trail of destruction and barbarism unparalleled on the Eastern Front. A man in the service of the devil, Oskar Dirlewanger seemed to him from the very beginning a different man. Karl-Heinz remembered him clearly. Short, thin, his face crisscrossed with premature wrinkles, his gaze dull. He didn't have the arrogance of academy officers or the fanatical brilliance of political commissars. He had something else, something tougher. He had fought in 2 wars, he had scars and a dry tone of voice that left no room for doubt. Each new recruit from the Sonderkommando had to swear loyalty to him directly. He told us we were his responsibility and that he would vouch for us. That we had made mistakes, yes, but that we were going to redeem ourselves by fighting. We believed him. Dirlewanger's words weren't just rhetoric, they were a way out. He didn't talk about glory or the Führer, but about surviving, fighting hard, and becoming someone again. The commander treated him with respect. He punished, yes, but not with sadism. He had seen him pardon a deserter by simply doubling his guard duty. It was fair, he said. He knew we were different, but he didn't humiliate us. That memory was darkened in Warsaw. The arrival was abrupt. The Eastern Front was collapsing and Warsaw was burning in uprising. The Sonderkommando was dumped there like meat to contain the fire. From the moment their trucks entered the suburbs, they knew it was different from anything before. The snipers were waiting for us on the rooftops. 2 fell as soon as we hit the asphalt. Dirlewanger, furious, ordered covering fire, flak artillery. We couldn't walk a block without being shot at. The houses were fortresses. Civilians were throwing themselves at us with homemade bombs. Children were acting as couriers. They were prepared. It was a war within a war. In the meetings before the assaults, Dirlewanger was clear. Civilians or not, if they fire, they're enemies. But if they surrender, they're taken prisoner. Anyone who disobeys answers to me. Karl-Heinz remembered this and repeated it insistently. He always said to respect those who surrendered. But the days passed and the hell deepened. One morning, the bodies of 10 Helferinnen, German auxiliaries, were found raped and executed near Zakret. Their trousers were down, the blood dried on their thighs, their eyes open. Dirlewanger had photos taken and displayed them in the command post. "This," he shouted, "is what we're fighting with." From that day on, something changed. The orders became stricter. Some commanders said no more prisoners would be taken. Von Bach, Zelewski later revoked that order, but by then many bullets had already been fired. The fighting was brutal. Entire houses were demolished with artillery, flanks scorched by flamethrowers. The insurgents dug tunnels, ambushed patrols, and used children as decoys. Karl-Heinz said he had never seen anything like it. "A pregnant woman threw a grenade at us from a window. She was riddled with bullets instantly, but how do you fight against that?" Once they entered a cellar. They found 3 German soldiers hanging, disfigured. Their teeth had been pulled out, their genitals mutilated. Dirlewanger witnessed the scenes firsthand. He said nothing. He turned around and ordered them to advance without pause. After that, several of them stopped asking questions. It became a war without questions. But even in the midst of that chaos, Karl-Heinz insisted. Dirlewanger wasn't asking them to commit atrocities, he wasn't ordering rape, he wasn't asking them to burn children alive. He was tough, yes, but he wasn't crazy. He knew everyone hated us, that they were watching us. He wanted results, not chaos. He recounted that, in the midst of the offensive, loudspeakers were sent out urging the children to be evacuated. Some did, others didn't. "You can't use your child as a shield and then demand sympathy." Wola barricades, the downtown catacombs, all was ruin and smoke. At one point, a group of insurgents surrendered. Among them were Poles, British, even Soviets. Karl-Heinz watched them line up and surrender their weapons. They expected the worst, and when they saw we weren't killing them, some of them cried. He never saw Dirlewanger again after Warsaw. He learned that he had taken a few days' leave after the victory. What did remain with him was that image. The small officer with a hoarse voice standing among smoking ruins, giving orders precisely without trembling. Many hated him, others called him a criminal. I saw something else, a man who sank with us in the mud, who did not abandon us, a soldier among beasts. The end of the genocide. After the crushing of the Warsaw Uprising, the SS Sturm Brigade Dirlewanger was transferred to Slovakia to suppress a new insurrection. On August 27, 1944, Slovak partisans ambushed a train in St. Martin and killed 22 German soldiers. This act precipitated a nationwide rebellion, supported by sections of the Slovak army. President Josef Tiso appealed for urgent assistance from the Reich, and on September 1st, SS Hauptamt Chief Gottlob Berger was appointed military commander-in-chief to suppress the uprising. Dirlewanger's unit, severely battered in Warsaw but still operational, was sent to Slovakia on October 16, 1944, with nearly 4,000 men organized into 2 regiments and artillery support. Their arrival coincided with an air raid by the Slovak Air Force, which bombed a train station in Diviaki, killing and wounding several of their men. Despite the blow, the brigade was immediately thrown into combat and assigned to relieve Battle Group Schaefer. In the following days, they fought intensely for control of Mount Ostro, but failed to take the position after several failed assaults. Finally, on October 25th, they captured the towns of Nekpoli and Bili, Potok, after a fierce fight. The unit's reputation, however, was crumbling even among the Germans themselves. An SD report noted that Dirlewanger's men behaved worse than partisans. They looted warehouses, robbed peasants, forcibly slept with local women, and mistreated civilians without cause. Internal discipline was also brutal. A public execution in November, witnessed by the entire unit, sent a clear message. 20 soldiers, including Ukrainians and former political prisoners, were shot for desertion. They were forced to kneel half-naked, illuminated by truck headlights, and Dirlewanger's own driver fired the shots to the back of the head. Despite this, the unit continued to grow. Himmler approved the incorporation of political prisoners who desired redemption, recruited directly from camps such as Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. On November 5th, to instill terror in the new recruits, a deserter was publicly hanged at Neuengamme before the transport departed for Dirlewanger. In December, the brigade fought on the Hungarian-Slovak border, occupied the Ipolisag area, destroyed part of the village, and sustained continuous fighting near Polost. By then, the unit had 5 battalions, artillery and rocket launchers, but was overstretched, disorganized, and suffering from serious command problems. General Johannes Friesner, inspecting the position, found Dirlewanger with a monkey over his shoulder, unaware of the situation at the front. He demanded an explanation, but that same evening the SS commander left his post without warning. By January 1945, with the front crumbling, Dirlewanger's capture was no longer just a possibility. It had become inevitable. The end of Oskar Dirlewanger, the beast without a grave. For Oskar Dirlewanger, the winter of 1945 was not just another season, it was the beginning of the collapse. The most feared, despised, and vilified commander of the Waffen-SS was no longer the scourge of partisans or the executioner of Warsaw, but a sick, wandering, and fugitive man. His body, pierced by old wounds, betrayed him. His authority, once unquestioned, was beginning to crumble among recruits who obeyed him out of fear and officers who avoided him out of disgust. In February, he was wounded again in combat. At almost 50 years old, the pain from an old chest injury returned with a vengeance, and with it, the order to replace him. For the first time since 1940, Oskar Dirlewanger was removed from command. The 36th SS Waffen Grenadier Division, which had emerged from its Sturm Brigade, fought on aimlessly. The unit, now a chaotic amalgamation of criminals, Volkssturm recruits and last-minute soldiers, was falling apart before the Soviet advance. They deserted by the dozens, killed each other, and collapsed on the snowy roads. Some hanged their own regimental commander. The division ceased to exist as an effective force on April 24th. It was no longer a unit, it was a wreck marching blindly toward the doomsday of the Reich, and Dirlewanger was no more. Some claim that he was evacuated by a Fieseler aircraft, Storch, from somewhere along the front lines in Berlin. Others say he escaped in a truck concealing inside the loot stolen during years of plunder, valuables, jewelry, paintings, medals. In April, he reappeared in his hometown of Esslingen, where he loaded his belongings and disappeared. He had a plan: to head south, to the edge of Swiss neutrality, or perhaps to Hitler's supposed Alpine stronghold. He wasn't seeking redemption, he was seeking impunity, but he didn't get far. In May 1945, he was captured by French troops in Altshausen, a small town in southern Germany. They locked him up in a makeshift detention center guarded by former Nazi concentration camp prisoners. The executioner was now at the mercy of his victims. No one needed an order. Dirlewanger was beaten, humiliated, spat upon, and abused without pause. He was no longer an SS man, an officer, or even a man. He was fodder for pent-up fury. On June 7, 1945, he was beaten to death according to the death certificate. He died after being mistreated by the guards, Pastor Roma noted. His body was not displayed, photographed, or shown as a trophy. The French demanded a closed, sealed coffin with constant guard. They feared his body would be desecrated, stolen, or even resurrected as a myth. On June 8th, he was buried without a name, without honors, without flowers, without a cross. A simple coffin was lowered into the Altshausen cemetery, watched only by the French captain who ordered his burial and the pastor who officiated a brief ritual. The earth swallowed him with the same indifference with which he had made thousands disappear. That was the end of the man who had commanded an army of criminals. The end of the partisan hunter, the murderer of innocents, the torturer of civilians. There was no justice, there was punishment, no tribunal, no defense. Only the fists and boots of those he never thought he'd have to look down on. He died as he lived, in the dark, in blood, alone.